and go ahead and pop over here. So here I am logged into the one of our demo accounts for the cookbook, and here I've got my business glossary, right? And over here I've got my data system inventory. Right? Open this in a new tab. And in my data system inventory, I have all the information about the different data systems, but I have the full data model repository there. Okay, so here are tables and columns and fields and schemas and stuff related to this system. And then, so back in the glossary area. Okay, each organization, you get your own tenant in that repository, and you can fill it in with whatever you want, and there's all sorts of ways to bring things in. So the first thing we talked about was the data system naming being used as a definition name. So there's two things. If you really want a business glossary term, if someone is talking about, customer ID or whatever as something that, but they're using data system naming, but you're talking about it in what should be an agnostic business way, then it is highly recommended that you create an agnostic functional definition, right, for this, and avoid using data system naming. So, it might be the customer ID is the reasonable name for it, but you might want to call it as like customer identifier or my customer number or whatever it might be that makes sense for externally facing, as well as system agnostic. So if you've got other places where this is stored, that it's not going to be confusing. And then once you've done that, then you want to build a technical definition that links back to this customer ID. And so this just like in this case, citizenship is a field that's defined here in the functional definition. For this particular ERP system, it's derived through sort of a joining of value with a code to get a description. In the data warehouse, it's just a single field, the citizenship field in the data warehouse, right? This is actually linking over to the data warehouse system, so you can see that value when I go into the warehouse and see that this particular student field and where it's used. So that's sort of how you want to do it if it's a glossary term. If it's not a glossary term, if you actually really are just trying to document the data system and you're talking about it because you want to supplement it with other things, then you want to go ahead and have it in that repository. And what we do is we have a way to ingest that from your data systems. The uniqueness on this is the combination of the systems, and other parent objects. For a relational database, it might be the schema, the table, the column. So you might have, you can have more than one thing called customer ID because it exists in 30 different tables, but it's unique because it's in a table and a schema and a system, and that's the uniqueness within that repository, right? But the object itself can be, and then you can supplement it within that system with tags and comments and security classifications and things like that in that repository. Okay, the next thing is a common name used with different valid contexts, right? So we talked about this before, but in the situation like where you have HR department versus academic department, what we highly recommend is don't just talk about department, is that you want to create multiple glossary entries with context in its name. So like instead of having a department, you have HR department or academic department, or an FTE, you might have like FTE state of Virginia, and FTE IPED, which is the federal number, and FTE for my own organization. And you want to specify the name based on context, like human resources or academic, or source based on some sort of regulatory thing like SOX or whatever it might be as a modifier. But that modifier is on the name, so you have unique entries for this. So when someone's asking about this, or like, oh, I would like a report of our current FTE, you could say, well, which FTE? And they would have to say, oh, I want that FTE. And then the report would know, we're using this FTE, and you can get that agreement. Sometimes that creates this argument, well, who gets the main one? Who gets the one that's just FTE? We all argue. My opinion on that is like, it doesn't matter. So if you're in an argument with someone like with that, let them have it. Let them have FTE. It doesn't really matter. I just try to avoid that. You can then, as I mentioned, you connect definitions together with related definitions, and you might have seen this in this example where you have sort of links to other definitions. These are actually undefined right now, but links over to other definitions. You can also have synonyms and common names and tags and other ways that you can sort of specify how things go. So often say like, but I want to have multiple entries in my glossary with the same name. And the example I always like to say is like, you're talking about things that sometimes you're trying to measure and report and count on your data. And if someone says, I want to know how many active students we have, and you have two different definitions of active student, it's like going into a store and taking two different items off the rack that have the same UPC code. And when you go up to buy them, it's going to come up like you're going to get the same dollar amount, right? If they're different things, they have to have different labels and different names and different codes. So that's how, that's what the glossary does, is it defines these things and specifies them so that you can create clarity. All right, we're running a little bit short on time, so I'll close out here as quickly as I can. But the last method here is you have legitimate disagreement about definitions. And in this point, I think this is where stewardship becomes really important. And with an application like ours, you can sort of drive that stewardship process for resolution and keep track of things. But the typical things, if you were going and seeing a definition and you don't think that looks right, you can submit a proposed change. You can say, actually, I want to have it changed to this. When you do that, you can add your own functional area to it, so it gets routed to also include you as well as the original area, if they, or your area, whatever the appropriate area is. If resolution is not possible, you can escalate that. We have the ability in our tool to bring in additional collaborators or to have some oversight on that. And if that doesn't work, I say go ahead with a different definition, right? Because then obviously if you can't agree on it and there is a compelling reason to count the way you want to count or to measure the way you want to measure, then create a different definition. If not, then you got to keep going back to the well to get that resolution. The other thing that's important, then if the definition has changed, it's important to understand the impact of that. Like, all right, so if you do end up changing the definition because you've consolidated, you need to know where these other things, the other reports. So systems like ours have dependency and impact analysis built